Squid Game was popular throughout much of the world, but not in the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. There, all foreign media is banned, especially anything from South Korea, under their law on the elimination of reactionary thought and culture. So when a man brought in a USB drive with Squid Game on it and sold a copy to a high school student, they both were breaking the law. The student? He was sentenced to life in prison. His friends who watched the show, they got 5 years of hard labor. And the man who brought it into North Korea, he was tied to a post and shot to death. What kind of a country kills people over a TV show? And this isn't even the craziest example, by a long shot. North Korea teaches school kids that their leader could drive at age 3. On their calendar, the year 0 starts with the birth of Kim Il-sung. And if your own birthday is on the same day, it's illegal to celebrate it then. Heck, the country has state-mandated hairstyles. And if you voice skepticism of the official narrative, it can land you, your kids, and your grandkids in prison. There are hundreds of crazy stories like that from Korea, and thousands more that will never be told. The elephant in the room is this: how did North Korea get so insane? I'm Ken LaCourte. I look at uncomfortable questions, or like this one, just weird situations, research them, and give them to you back as straightforward as I can. Here, I couldn't even wrap my head around it. I mean, was it always this way? And how did it stay nutty for such a really long time? We'll break it down by looking at how it works today, figure out how did it get this way over the last century, and finally ask, can it last? In a world where information leaks through borders, firewalls, and even smuggled USB drives, can this bizarre system actually survive much longer? Because some cracks are starting to show. George Orwell comes to mind when we think of a society like this, but a better analogy would be Jim Jones, because the country has more in common with a cult. Here's how it works. In North Korea, the Kim family isn't just respected, they're worshipped. Every home is legally required to hang portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il on the wall. And not just hang them, you need to clean them every day. Inspectors can make unannounced visits, and if the frames are dirty, you can be punished. If your house catches fire, you're supposed to rescue the portraits before your own children. Citizens wear loyalty pins on their chest with the faces of their great leaders. And when Kim Jong-il died in 2011, people were sent to prison camps for not crying hard enough. If you show anything less than absolute devotion, you don't just risk punishment for yourself, your parents and your children could go down with you. Because North Korea enforces what they call a 3 generations of punishment rule. If you commit a political crime, like saying anything critical of the leader, your family ends up in a prison camp. Not because they did anything wrong, but because the regime believes that disloyalty runs in families. And those prison camps, they make Guantanamo Bay look like a yoga retreat. Prisoners are routinely starved, tortured, worked to death, or executed. So how do you keep 25 million people from revolting? Well, the first step is to make sure they never find out that there's another option. As I said, there's no foreign media at all. No internet, YouTube, foreign books, newspapers, nothing. State media is all there is, and it continuously tells people that the United States is collapsing and that South Korea is a hellhole, and that the world is jealous of North Korean prosperity. It also tells stories about Kim Jong-un, like he could outshoot trained soldiers by the time he was 8, and that he could beat naval officers in sailing competitions as a teenager. Kids grow up memorizing that stuff. They start school with songs about the Kims, and they attend loyalty sessions where they confess their impure thoughts and they snitch on others, including their own family. That's the norm. The regime watches everyone, and everyone watches everyone else. They're all potential informants, and if they report on you, the government's going to believe them. And while the state sells the image of a glorious workers' paradise, the reality is most people there live in grinding poverty. The capital of Pyongyang is essentially a showcase for elites and foreign visitors, although not much of a showcase. And most of the country doesn't have reliable access to electricity, running water, or even protein. At the same time, the regime spends much of its money on nukes and defense. While people scavenge for food, the government has poured billions of dollars into its military. North Korea has an estimated 40 to 50 nuclear warheads and continues to test ballistic missiles. The regime tells its people that America is minutes away from launching an invasion, so they build nukes to show their strength, and not so subtly threaten the rest of the world. Look, I tried my best to get these facts straight, but this is a country built on lies and defectors, so verifying anything isn't easy. Still, if I make any substantive mistake, I'll correct it in a pinned comment below. Okay, so North Korea didn't start as a dystopian nightmare, but it didn't really begin as a paradise either. How did it get this way? Well, the Korean Peninsula had its moments of peace and prosperity, but not in a long time. The Joseon dynasty ruled from the 1300s to the 1800s, and that was 500 years during which they had relative stability. It was culturally rich and scientifically ahead of its time. But by the late 1800s, that dynasty was crumbling. Corruption, peasant rebellions, and foreign powers started circling. China, Russia, Japan, they all eyed Korea as a potential buffer zone. Japan won, and it ruled Korea for 35 years, from 1910 to 1945. And they were brutal. The Japanese banned the Korean language, forced people into labor and military service, some women into prostitution. They essentially tried to erase Korean identity. And when Japan surrendered at the end of World War II, the Allies divided the peninsula in two. The Soviets took the north and America the south. The idea was temporary control, and the Soviets installed a revolutionary named Kim Il-sung. He promised reform and independence, but it didn't take long before North Korea hardened into one of the world's most closed societies. 2 years after he took power, Kim Il-sung wanted the whole peninsula, invading the South and launching what Americans call the Korean War. What followed was 3 years of carnage and millions dead. The U.S. fought alongside the South, and China fought with the North. The war ended basically where it started, at the 38th parallel, with no formal peace treaty, just a ceasefire that's still in effect today. And that's where the dictatorship really started turning into a cult. Kim Il-sung didn't just lead, he transformed himself into a living god. Statutes, portraits, mandatory songs about his greatness. Textbooks said he invented modern farming, saved the Korean race, and essentially won independence single-handedly. He outlawed religion, competing ideologies, and purged anyone who disagreed, even his own family members. Over time, he blended traditional Confucian respect for elders with a Soviet-style authoritarianism and Korean nationalism. The result they called Juche. Officially, Juche means self-reliance. Unofficially, it means we're on our own and everyone wants to kill us. It was the perfect tool to justify paranoia and isolation. Under Juche, North Korea limited and manipulated aid, they expelled foreigners, and they began a decades-long buildup of military force. And it worked, at least politically. Kim Il-sung stayed in power for 46 years and turned the country into a sealed bunker. Then came his son, Kim Jong-il, and things got even nuttier. Kim Jong-il inherited the throne in 1994, just as the Soviet Union collapsed. Without Soviet aid, the economy crumbled. Crops failed. Fuel imports stopped. Trains didn't run. By the mid-90s, a massive famine had begun, and it was called the Arduous March. It killed somewhere between 600,000 and 3 million people, up to 10% of the population. But it wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a controlled one. Aid from China and the UN was distributed based on loyalty. The regions that didn't worship the Kims hard enough were left to starve. Parents fed tree bark to their kids. Some reportedly resorted to cannibalism. And while people were dying in the streets, Kim Jong-il built himself an underground palace, actually more than one. He bought rare cars and imported $800,000 a year worth of Hennessy. In case that didn't send a clear message, he also built concentration camps where political prisoners and their children were tortured, starved, and worked to death. He ran the country like a death cult with nukes. And, just like his dad, he made himself a god. State media claimed he wrote 1,500 books in college, that he could control the weather, that a double rainbow and a new star appeared when he was born. The madness became policy. And after he died, they got his son, Kim Jong-un, who we have now. Within 2 years, he'd executed his uncle with anti-aircraft guns. Then he had his half-brother assassinated with a nerve agent in a Malaysian airport. Moves like that, they kept potential challengers in line. He accelerated the nuclear program, cracked down even harder on outside information, and made it a death penalty offense to smuggle South Korean entertainment into the country. Why? Well, South Korean media shows what real life could look like. Happy families, freedom, food. And that's dangerous to a regime built on fear and lies. The second people realize the rest of the world isn't starving to death, the whole thing starts to get a little wobbly. That's why North Korea doubled down. The madness isn't accidental, it's strategic. Each escalation happened for a reason, usually because the outside world got a little too close. The big question now is, can it last? One family in North Korea has held grip for over 70 years, across 3 generations. But the world's getting harder to wall off, and the cracks are starting to show. And what the regime fears most isn't really foreign invasion, it's foreign ideas. Look at the black markets, which aren't government-run, but survival-driven. After the 1990s famine, when the state's food distribution completely collapsed, ordinary people began trading illegally for rice, medicine, and anything they could get. The government turned a blind eye because even they knew it was necessary. Today, millions rely on these markets to survive, and they've expanded far beyond food. Chinese cosmetics, South Korean clothing, flash drives, they all make their way in through smugglers, and with them, those dangerous ideas come too. Defectors have described this exact moment, seeing South Korean soap operas for the first time, realizing that the poor enslaved South actually looked pretty good. Some called it waking up, others called it a betrayal of everything they were taught, and either way, it stuck with them. More and more Koreans have seen enough black market glimpses of real life to know that something doesn't add up. But while technology can help North Koreans learn about the outside world, the regime also weaponizes it to keep its grip. Smartphones come with pre-installed software that watches users, logs keystrokes, and sends alerts if banned media is detected. Government inspections of phones are common, and even having foreign slang in a text can get you in trouble. They've also begun using facial recognition, digital IDs, and biometric tracking, tools lifted straight from China's playbook. It's not about modernizing, it's about locking the gates even tighter. But those gates aren't holding perfectly. The border with China is long and hard to police. Balloons carrying USB sticks, Bibles, or cash get floated over from South Korea. Chinese cell towers reach over the border in certain areas, letting a few North Koreans briefly access the outside world. A single phone call is risky, but people still try. Some of these contacts lead to escape routes. There's a loose underground railroad of brokers, safe houses, and bribed guards that help North Koreans flee through China and eventually to South Korea or the West. Now, it's rare and it's insanely dangerous, and even China doesn't recognize North Koreans as refugees. They treat them as illegal immigrants and send them back, and that usually means torture, prison camps, or worse. Still, some try, and that alone says something. Internationally, the regime keeps playing its game of nuclear chicken. One month it's launching missiles, the next it's talking peace. The goal isn't to unify Korea or attack the US, it's survival. Every missile test says, leave us alone or risk a war you don't want. And honestly, it's worked. Sanctions have hurt them severely, but it hasn't been enough to break the regime. China continues to prop it up, partly because they don't want to collapse on their border, partly because North Korea is a convenient buffer between them and US-aligned South Korea. So what would it actually take for this system to fall apart? A coup from within? I mean, that's tough. The elites have been purged so thoroughly that everyone's terrified of breathing wrong. A revolution from below? I mean, that's unlikely too. People are too isolated, too monitored, too powerless. Even if they wanted to revolt, it'd be hard. But change doesn't always have to be through a revolution. It can also come slowly. More USBs, more black market phones, more kids wondering why their lives look nothing like the propaganda videos. You know, it's easy to spot and point out foreign propaganda, especially ham-handed stuff in North Korea or China. But what about in the United States? We do have a news media that's largely free from government control. But not long ago, the powers that be pulled over a big one on us. Today, it's pretty clear to anyone intelligent that COVID leaked from a Chinese lab. And it was certainly no surprise that China would lie about it. But it was shocking that our own healthcare establishment and the US media would essentially help them in that cover-up as millions of people died around the world. It was a dark, disappointing chapter in US history, and it's worth a watch. I'm Ken LaCourte. Thanks for watching. If you got something useful out of this, I hope you come back again. Take care.